I woke up that morning and checked the score and laughed out loud.
Well, we all started cheering so loud. My mom came upstairs because that Grand Slam was amazing, right? Like we're all.
I heard my dad cheering, and I'm like, I was behind, so now I'm just like waiting for it. Like, oh my god.
Oh, man.
I texted everybody.
Cool. Did you see the Grand Slam at the party?
I think so.
Yeah.
No, I did.
Yeah.
I texted everyone, this is where it ends, tonight the night, and then like 2 runs, and I'm like, oh god.
It would have been really cool.
The whole Atlanta Works franchise thing where they choke the lead, that thing happens.
Yeah, it could have been really awesome. But no.
Georgia seems to have a running team with that.
Yeah, for one.
Jason said it was just so Atlanta of them.
Now you
And
can't.
they'll lose to Alabama by like 40 points whenever they think they're unstoppable.
I still think the most Atlanta thing I've ever seen was a couple years ago when they, all right, buddy, when they blew up the Georgia Dome and the MARTA bus pulled in front of the cameras that were filming the blowing up of the Georgia Dome and it was all blocked by the MARTA bus. That was hilarious.
Awesome.
That was because I was like, okay,
No, the most.
there's nothing more Atlanta than that.
Marta.
No, the most thing.
What, bad gentrification? No.
What? No, bad traffic.
Yeah,
What?
very bad. Whoops. I
But
was on that page.
Atlanta losing when they were leading 28-3 in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, that's pretty Atlanta too. Hey, oh, you can put it right up there on the counter. Yep, thanks. All right, I have some stuff to pass back real quick. All right. Sydney. Fatima. Sydney. Savannah. James is on the floor again. James. Jack. James. Sydney.
Put all my stuff in your-
Baby boy. Ethan. Becker.
Yeah, so,
Okay, I was
You missed it.
All right.
I just had a color picture and I took so long making the
Bailey.
correct colors on
I know.
my computer.
I know, I figured it out as best I could.
That was the chromosome thing?
Yeah,
mitosis
that
thing.
was, yeah,
Okay,
the
good.
mitosis,
I sent it in
meiosis,
last night.
meiosis thing. Yeah, I saw you sent some stuff. I haven't looked through it yet. All right, so we are going to be talking about human heredity today. We've talked so much about how we get to this point. Now we're at the point where we're seeing how this impacts us. This is a longer lesson with a lot of information, but it's a really interesting one. I think it's a little more engaging and a little more relatable, because we're going to talk about some specific disorders and they may be things that you've been exposed to. So a picture of chromosomes arranged in a picture is called what? Karyotype. Yep. So here's a karyotype. Can you deduce anything from this karyotype?
Male and female.
Which is it?
I can't tell.
Don't know.
I think it's male.
It's male.
Male.
Yeah,
Down my bottom.
that's a dude's karyotype. That's about what we can tell.
It's a bro karyotype.
And we can also tell that
Broyotype.
he has all the correct number of chromosomes, right? Nothing weird going on there with chromosomes. So a typical human is going to have 46 chromosomes and 23 pairs. The number of chromosomes helps identify what the organism is. Now, for example, this particular species of roundworm is going to have 4. That particular species of rice has 24 chromosomes. And this is diploid, right? We're talking about somatic cells, not gametes. Homo sapiens, that's us, we got 46, but this chimpanzee's got 48 and a dog there has 78. So it doesn't mean that the more chromosomes you get, the more complex you get. That is not necessarily true. But this is why species have to have the same number of chromosomes, because it wouldn't work. Like, this is why, chimpanzees cannot mate with dogs. But a Great Dane and a Chihuahua could technically, I mean, it'd be a little difficult. You better hope it's a female Great Dane. It can technically produce offspring, right? I don't think a female Chihuahua could survive a pregnancy with Great Dane puppies. I don't think the puppies would survive. Something would go awry. So egg and sperm are haploid, containing half the amount of chromosomes. So that's 23. So these cells are called sex cells or gametes. Gametes is the more appropriate term, and it's a shorter word. So I'll usually say gametes when I'm talking about sex cells. So female is XX, male is XY. And that has to do with how the X and Y chromosomes are inherited. And the way that works is that when your other chromosomes, your other cells are called diploid, those that have 46. And they call them autosomes or somatic. Sometimes you'll hear somatic. Somatic just means body cells. So here's how you get your XX, your XY. So every human egg has an X. All of them do, because all females are XX. And when you start with that meiosis process and that gets divided up, you're still going to have one X over here and one X over here, right? But sperm are going to have X's and Y's because males have XY. And when that divides up into gametes, some are going to have the X and some are going to have the Y. What is it? Okay, it's weird. I was going to say, I hear talking. All right, so this ensures that about half of the zygotes will be 46XX and the others will be 46XY. This is important. Now, with humans, this is definitely what we see, right? We see about 50-50 with our sex dispersion, right? About 50-50 male, female. But in nature, it isn't always the case. If you think about especially herd animals in particular, deer, things like that, like what's the sex ratio in deer? Is it 50-50?
Way more women.
Way more female deer, right? And the reason is because one buck's going to mate with a lot of does in a mating season. And that has to do with the fact that they really only have like one mating season, right? Some animals in nature may have two, but they only have, there's one time a year when those does are fertile and can conceive. Humans is different, 12 times a year roughly. So obviously we don't have the issue of having one breeding season where we have one male that, you know, has to basically spread his genetic material everywhere, which is what the bucks do, right?
Also, it's like hunters and such, and
For what?
like hunters.
Hunters, yeah. Mhm.
Take away the males as well.
Yep. If you take away a buck, you've taken away a lot of future offspring because they reproduce with multiple females. All right, so human traits. So human genes are inherited according to the same principles that Mendel discovered. And a pedigree chart, which is what we just worked with, shows the relationships within a family. And there are some pedigree charts that get really complicated, right? Now, you can show just people, and then you can show people that are affected. You can show people that carry. So some are going to carry a disease. Some are going to be affected by a disease. You can show living and deceased people by putting the slash through. So there's lots of interesting, and look, see, they show identical twins this way, fraternal twins this way. And then this is how you show adopted. So it's interesting. There are lots of ways you can go about, lots of information you can get from a pedigree chart. So genetic counselors, these are people who analyze pedigree charts to infer the genotypes of family members. So a lot of traits are strongly influenced by environmental or non-genetic factors. And that includes stuff like nutrition and exercise. So if you think about, if you've ever been to a colonial graveyard, ever been to one? Anybody ever been to one? You ever noticed anything about the headstone and the footstone and the size of the grave? Like they're tiny. They're tiny. Have you ever been to like Williamsburg or any of the colonial graveyards from the 1700s or early 1800s? They are little people. That doesn't mean that their genes weren't set up to grow as tall as we are today. They were impacted by their environment. They probably primarily didn't have the same access to nutrition that we have. People are taller today, generally speaking, than they were a couple hundred years ago. And the genetic makeup isn't the cause of that. It's the environmental factors. So the human genome is our complete set of genetic information. It includes tens of thousands of genes, right? Some of the very first genes to be identified were those that control blood type. So back before we had DNA that we could use in forensic science, it was only blood type. And we could tell from other body fluids a blood type. Like if there was a situation where sometimes there was semen left at a scene, but no blood. They could tell if it was like an A positive, an A excreter or a B excreter is what they'd say. This person has A blood type or B blood type, but they couldn't tell who he was beyond that. They could just basically exclude anybody that had the wrong blood type. And that got people a little further, but not a lot. You know, it could maybe rule somebody out, but not anywhere near as detailed as we can do now. So human blood types come in a variety of genetically determined blood groups. The different blood types are A, B, and O. And then there is an RH factor, which is plus or minus. Does anybody know their blood type? I know mine.
I'm pretty sure I have an A negative.
I think yours is A positive. What is yours?
I think I'm A negative.
A negative. Okay. Now I'm O positive. Yeah.
I think I'm positive.
So you can see there are antibodies. And this is why it matters when you have to get blood donated. So if you ever watch any of the medical dramas or any of those movies like that, you'll hear people think, doctors in an ER will say type and cross, like they want to know what the blood type is. Now you can give O negative. O negative is the one that you can give to anybody. So people with O negative blood are people in high demand for being donors. There are a lot of people who have become like big donors. We had at church, we had a blood drive a couple years ago, and there was a couple people there that were getting their 100-gallon mark. You know, like they've been giving and giving and giving and giving all the time. Yeah, because they know that it's apparently. And we have it. Jason has a friend who gives plasma like once a week or every other week. He gives plasma. That's a big deal too. Yeah, he does it all the time apparently. So yeah, that's basically the liquid part of your blood, right? So RH factor. So it's called the rhesus factor. Interesting little story behind RH factor. And it's an important characteristic of blood cells. It indicates whether the blood of two different people is compatible when mixed, such as a mother and a baby. This is really important because if you have a positive or a negative and they clash, it can cause all kinds of issues with pregnancies. So if they have a different blood group of characteristics, different blood characteristics, wow, it can cause many problems. So most people are Rh positive, meaning they've inherited the Rh factor from either their mother or their father. If a fetus does not inherit the Rh factor from either his mother or father, then he or she is Rh negative. If a woman is Rh negative and her fetus is Rh positive, it's called Rh incompatibility. And if she's ever carrying an Rh positive child, her Rh antibodies are going to recognize the Rh proteins on the surface of the baby's blood where they mix at the placental. There's a little place where like you've got exchange, because that's how babies in mammals get nourished as they're growing, right? From their mother's blood system. So her antibodies will pass to the baby's bloodstream and they attack those cells, and it can make the baby's red blood cells swell and rupture, and it's really bad. So the reason it's called the rhesus factor is because of this monkey, the rhesus macaque, if you've ever heard of the rhesus macaque. So in 1937, Carl Landsteiner and Alexander, I'm going to say Wiener, I'm not going to say Wiener, discovered a new blood type, the rhesus blood type, an Rh factor. The rhesus protein is named for the rhesus monkey, which also carries the gene, and it is a protein that lives on the surface of red blood cells. So these monkeys are cool. Actually, there is some really interesting video of them in, I want to say it's India, but they've done some sort of like psychological research on them, because what they do is sort of fascinating. They've learned that if there are like cable cars, you can look it up, monkeys resuscitating their friends, no joke. Because no, for real, these monkeys, they have learned that you can get electrocuted if you touch the wrong part of the cable. And sometimes one of them will get electrocuted and the others have learned how to resuscitate them. Like there are monkeys resuscitating other monkeys. They slap on them and they stick their face in water and they shake them awake. It's a little brutal to watch, but they actually have learned to do that. And that's fascinating that they even care. Like, why do they care? Even if it's a monkey they weren't hanging out with, they'll still do it.
I'm calling it now 2080 monkey doctors.
Monkey doctors. All right. So blood type compatibility. So O negative is a donor for everybody. See, and O positive is only a donor for this group here. Right. And then A negative only can donate to this, A positive. But if you're AB positive, you can only donate. It can only be accepted by AB positive. So
What was the trials for this? Was it just trial and error? Get killing people or?
You know, I don't, that's a great question. I don't know.
Oh, it didn't work. It's right.
Yeah. So distribution of blood types by country. And this is interesting because it is genetic, right? I mean, this is a genetic thing. So within certain cultures or ethnic backgrounds, you may see more of one type or another. But you'll notice that A negative is much more common in like Brazil, Spain, Australia, UK. There's very little A negative in these Asian countries, China, Thailand, Malaysia. So if you're A negative and you get in an accident over there, I would wonder how much blood they actually have to donate to you, right? Whereas like O positive and O negative seem to be pretty well spread out, and A positive. And then obviously your rarest one right there is your B negative. There's very little B negative, and there's almost none of it, again, in these Asian countries. Interesting.
Well, like here, and I know in the UK too, they'll have guys on motorcycles that they'll rush up to accidents. Well, car accidents that have little coolers built onto them and they got blood transfusions ready to go.
So recessive alleles. Many genes have become known through the study of genetic disorders. In most cases, genetic disorders are usually recessive, not always, usually. There are some genetic disorders that are dominant. So we call these autosomal recessive conditions. And here are some examples: albinism, cystic fibrosis, sickle cell disease, Tay-Sachs. These are the ones we're going to look at today. So we're going to do a little epidemiology on each of these. We're going to go over some signs and symptoms, and then we're going to go over some epidemiology, which kind of tells you sort of the prevalence or incidence and where diseases are located. So incidence is like how often it's diagnosed in a given year, whereas prevalence is how it exists within the population, like what % of the population currently has this disorder. So albinism, people with albinism have the following symptoms. What do you think? What do you think of? Lack of pigment. Yep. What'd you say?
Blind.
Yeah, they have vision problems. They do. A lot of people don't think about that. It's not just the lack of pigment. They have major vision issues. Anybody know anyone with albinism? I do. Yeah. So it's the absence of color in skin, hair, or eyes, or lighter than normal coloring in skin, hair, or eyes. So if an albino is descended from Nordic people or maybe Celtic people, they're going to be really fair like this kid. But if the albino is descended from African or Middle Eastern people, they will be darker in color than this kid, but they're not as dark in color as their relatives would be, right? Patches of skin that have an absence of color. Strabismus or crossed eyes. Photophobia, which is sensitivity to light. Well, obviously, if you're lacking melanin, light's not going to be your friend. Nystagmus or involuntary rapid eye movements. Nystagmus, some people's eyes will go back and forth like this, very fast, or they can go up and down. This one is a vertical nystagmus, and this very often is a sign of neurological issue. The person I know with albinism definitely has a horizontal nystagmus. As a little baby, people were like, oh, look at a little TikTok. Does it look like a clock? I mean, her eyes would go back and forth like a clock pendulum. And some people had nicknamed her TikTok in a loving way. They weren't being mean to her. But yeah, her little eyes would bounce back and forth like crazy. Impaired vision or blindness, as James pointed out. Astigmatism, do you know what that is?
Yes.
What's astigmatism?
Floaters in your eye.
Kind of like that, yeah. It has to do with like light flares and halos and how light refracts in your eye. It's not uncommon. A lot of people have astigmatism. And then epidemiology. So albinism can affect all ethnic backgrounds. Some of these diseases are going to affect certain ethnic backgrounds more than others. And this is one that will affect certain ethnic backgrounds more than others. So worldwide, it's about 1 in 17,000. Prevalence of different forms of albinism vary considerably by population. And this one is highest overall in people of sub-Saharan African descent. So the southern part of Africa is where you're going to find more albinism than anywhere else in the world. And interestingly, the person I know who is albino is of African descent. I don't know if it's sub-Saharan or not because she's adopted, so we don't know her entire background, but she is of African descent. So she's black, but her skin tone is close to my color and her hair is blonde and her eyes are kind of gray. So people with sickle cell disease have the following symptoms. What do you know about sickle cell? Nothing. Did you read? So sickle cell, what's a sickle?
Tool used to harvest grain.
Yeah, like the thing the
It
Grim.
changes the protein
Mini
shape.
site.
of the red
Yeah.
cells.
So the Grim Reaper carries a sickle, right? It's that curved blade you use to cut the wheat down, right? Uh-huh.
I thought he carried a scythe.
Same thing. A scythe is a type of sickle, I think. That's a good point.
Is it a long?
So right here,
I mean,
so right here are your red blood cells, right? And they're supposed to look like this. They're supposed to look like a donut that didn't quite get punched through, or a disc that got squished in the middle. But with sickle cell, they look like that. Yeah, like a boomerang. Yep. So there are a lot of concerns with sickle cells. Anybody ever known anyone with sickle cell? I've known somebody with sickle cell. So fatigue and anemia. Anemia is when you don't have enough iron in your red blood cells, and it causes you to not be able to get enough oxygen to all of your body. Pain crises. This is no joke. The girl that I knew that had sickle cell, her name was Lakia, and she worked with me when I worked at a shelter. She was on my staff, and she would call in sick, and girl could barely talk to tell me she was too sick to come because she was having a pain crisis. It's extreme, incapacitating pain. It'll take you down for a day, 2 days. It's really, really bad. And you can imagine, think about it. If blood can't get to your body parts, good gracious. Dactylitis, which is swelling and inflammation of the hands or feet, and arthritis. Bacterial infections, well, because their blood's not circulating oxygen where it needs to be. Sudden pooling of blood in the spleen or liver congestion, that sounds fun. Lung and heart injury, leg ulcers, bone infarcts, which are when death occurs to portions of your bone, it just dies. And this one as well, aseptic necrosis. Anybody want to guess what that is?
Some sort of death.
Necrosis is death. What would septic be, do you know?
Wait.
Yeah, septic has to do with like an infection. Like if you have sepsis, you have a complete infection, your whole body's infected. Aseptic would mean there's no infection, but you lost some tissue, it died. Like parts of your body just died. Eye damage,
That doesn't sound great.
no. So epidemiology, this does affect all ethnic backgrounds. Its frequency worldwide is 112, that's the one I missed, per. I caught it before you did. 112 per 100,000, but this is one that is way more frequent in people of African descent. In fact, it's 1 in 500 for people of African descent. People of European descent or Asian descent or Latin descent very, very rarely have sickle cell. It's almost always people of African descent. And it's painful. Cystic fibrosis. Okay, you may have heard of this one because this one's pretty common. What do you know about that? You hear a lot about it. People advocate for it, raise money for it. It is a lung issue, yeah. So salty tasting skin. I don't know. The other group asked who licked their skin. I'm sure that somewhere along the line, that's something you just figure out. I don't want to know how that was learned.
Small children.
Persistent coughing at times with phlegm. Okay, this is like the hallmark. So their lungs fill up with mucus and they can't breathe. They have to cough it out. So now what they have are these vests that they put on them, and the vests vibrate, which shakes loose all of the mucus, and they can cough it up better. But what they used to do, and they probably still do it, but before the vests were an option, there was this thing you'd have a family member or whoever your caretaker is wear. It was like a big plastic ring, and in your palm there was a disc, sort of like half a ball sticking out, like a nub on it, and they had to pound on your back. And I mean pound on your back hard. And we're talking, for half an hour, a couple times a day. It was miserable, absolutely miserable. And it was the only way to keep them breathing, because that way you can loosen up all that phlegm.
I was gonna say, this is what my sister had.
It was one of the, yeah, she had many things all at once, but
Yeah.
yes, it's pretty terrible. Frequent lung infections, including pneumonia or bronchitis. That sounds awesome. Wheezing and shortness of breath. If you've had asthma, you know what that feels like, but yeah, this is like extra. Poor growth or weight gain in spite of a good appetite. Frequent greasy, bulky stools or difficulty with bowel movement. So now it's impacted not just lungs, but digestive system too. Male infertility. Now this will affect all ethnic backgrounds. Frequency worldwide is 1 in 3,200, much more common than the others we've seen so far. And highest overall in people of European descent. So people of European descent are far more likely to have this run in their family lines. Now, Tay-Sachs is one that is almost entirely isolated to a very particular ethnic community. So it's interesting. So People with Tay-Sachs, if you've never heard of it, this is a neurological disorder and it's a progressive neurological disorder. It gets worse and worse with age, and most of these children don't live long lives. So they're overly startled by noises and movement because their neurological system is not processing things properly. They're very slow to reach milestones like crawling, and then they lose skills that they've already. I love how this was from a British website. It said learnt, and I kept it in because that's fun. So even if they gain these skills, they gain them late and then they lose them. Why do they lose them? Because they're floppy, they're weak, and it keeps getting worse until they're unable to move, and then they are paralyzed. They have difficulty swallowing. They have loss of hearing or vision. So they'll go from a baby that's slow to develop to one that loses all their skills, becomes paralyzed, blind, and deaf. Awful. Muscle stiffness, which is painful too. Seizures. And it's actually caused by the absence of an enzyme that is supposed to clean up a particular lipid from cells. And when you lack that, it builds up in those cells, and that waste product isn't removed, and that causes all of these other issues. Now, epidemiology. Most ethnic backgrounds, it can occur, and its frequency worldwide is about 1 in 100,000. You'll see it a little more often in French Canadians, Cajuns, older Amish, in Louisiana, and those with Irish ancestry, but it is almost entirely isolated to Ashkenazi Jewish ethnic background. People of Ashkenazi Jewish descent, which is sort of an Eastern European Jewish descent, it's 1 in 3,600. That is way, way higher. Yeah.
Are we talking like the area of where that, like, Jewish is a religion, is that?
That's why it's interesting. So this is interesting. So Judaism is one of those things where like they consider the ethnicity as being passed through the mother. Like if your father is not religiously Jewish, then it doesn't matter if your mother is, they'll still say you're a Jew non-religiously, but sort of it's a persuasion, not an ethnicity, except things like this. Ashkenazi Jews have been a community for so long that they're now their own ethnicity. So because of that, and because it's a tight community, it was a smaller regional area. And because of that, they obviously the interbreeding has gone on for centuries, as it would in any population. And they stick to each other because their religion is so important. They're not going outside of their religion and not going outside of their community as often until this was well established. And now it doesn't matter where they are in the world. They can be anywhere in the world, and this can be an issue. So this is something that people who knowingly have Ashkenazi Jewish descent tend to look into before they have children, because especially if they have any family history of it, because it will run in lines and it becomes a major issue. Because obviously this is not something you want a child to have. It's really miserable disease. So those are all recessive disorders. How about some dominant ones? So autosomal dominant conditions. Here's some we're going to look at. Huntington's, Marfan, polydactyly, and achondroplasia. All right, so Huntington's, you've probably heard of Huntington's. Huntington's is, you hear about it every so often, and Huntington's is something that doesn't really impact you until you start to age much older. Not like Tay-Sachs, which impacts you when you're tiny, or cystic fibrosis as a child, and sickle cell your whole life, albinism your whole life. So Huntington's disease, difficulty concentrating, memory lapses, depression, mood swings, irritability, or aggressive behavior. If you've ever seen Awakenings, it was a movie we talked about maybe looking at last year. It's a really good movie, but they've managed to get some treatments for this that work a little bit. And it's better. It's gotten better. They haven't, obviously you can't cure it, but they've gotten a little better at treating it. So stumbling and clumsiness. So all these are neurological things so far, right? Involuntary jerking or fidgety movements of the limbs and body. Now this jerking can be, minor fidgets like this kind of stuff, or it can be big, huge, gross motor jerking. This is one of the diseases that back when the initial push for medical cannabis came out, this is one of the diseases that they kind of went after because, and you can look it up, there are YouTube videos of people, this one guy in particular whose brother was really campaigning for medical cannabis. And when he gave it to his brother with Huntington's, he went from this to just sitting there chill in like 5 minutes. It was crazy how fast it was. So this is one of the diseases that they pushed for when they're working with legislation.
Does this happen like only in older people, or is it rare cases where it happens in younger?
It progresses. So I mean, obviously it's going to hit at a different age. Most things have a target age where they kind of hit. And but this is one that usually it doesn't hit you until you're an adult. That's pretty miserable. I wouldn't want it. Difficulty speaking clearly. Eventually you may find all communication very difficult. Some of them just can't physically form speech anymore. Swallowing problems, increasingly slow or rigid movements, breathing problems, difficulty moving around, and may eventually lose ability to walk or sit up by themselves. So what's the epidemiology for Huntington's? All ethnic backgrounds, frequency worldwide is 2.7 per 100,000. And it's highest overall in people of Egyptian descent.
What if they're only 0.7 of the person?
I know. But
They cut
Egyptian,
off 3. They cut off 0.3 of the person.
I find this interesting because
Like,
I have
what
never
is
made that connection before. I guess most of the people that I've seen or learned about that have Huntington's tended to be of European descent. So I find this very interesting. I would be curious to know if like in Egypt, I wonder how prevalent it is. Like, are their nursing systems set up for this in particular because it's more common there? Is it that much more common? I don't know. But this is the type of situation where people may get put in a nursing home or may have, nursing help when they're in their 50s or 60s as opposed to their 70s or 80s, right? So Marfan's. All right. Marfan's is one that is not that uncommon. And you probably have come into contact with people with it and just not known it. Because if their clothes are on, unless you're paying really close attention to their fingers, you might not see it. So they're tall, slender, usually very tall. They have disproportionately long arms, legs, and fingers. Look at the fingers. See how long his fingers are? A breastbone that protrudes outward or dips inward. High arched palate, crowded teeth, heart murmurs that can cause heart problems, heart murmurs, extreme nearsightedness. This dude's got glasses. Abnormally curved spine, flat feet. Now, all ethnic backgrounds. Frequency is 2.5 per 10,000. That's not that uncommon, right?
Is it like their hands are just.
No, they had a bigger.
They just rounded some numbers. Yeah, they're trying to make the number fit into 10,000, so it's easier to. Whoop. Now, before we get to polydactyly guy, can you think of any former U.S. president that maybe might have been tagged as possibly having had this? Lincoln, absolutely. There are a lot of people who believe Lincoln had Marfan syndrome. If you look at pictures of Lincoln and pay attention to his hands, yep, it's fascinating to think that it very well may have been something that affected him. I mean, back then everybody had crowded teeth, right? There were no braces. Nobody was paying attention to this kind of stuff. And nearsightedness, shoot, not everybody had glasses. It was a thing, whatever. But yeah, this is not all that uncommon. I've actually seen people like in public passing them and been like, oh, I think they get very, very long fingers or whatever, or very, very tall, stand out. Okay, polydactyly, not uncommon at all. So polydactyly is extra digits. And there are 3 types. You can have preaxial, central, or post-axial. And this just has to do with where the extra digit exists. Yeah, right. So polydactyly is fascinating. So it's all ethnic backgrounds. Frequency worldwide is 1 in 1,000. Not uncommon at all. And it's highest in people. There's the of. I knew there was an of I missed. There it is. Highest overall in people of African descent at 1 in 150. Really common there. Does anybody know anybody with extra digits? My cousin's first son was born with an extra digit on each appendage, 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot, but they were not complete digits. They lacked bone. So he had like a little thing here and here, and it had a nail. I mean, it was a finger with a nail, but it had no thumb. And then he off his little toes, like the sides of his little toes and the sides of his little fingers, he had this little extra thing. And my cousin called them his monster fingers. And so what they did at that point was they just tied him off, like literally tied it off with like a surgical string and waited for that to die and fall off on its own. And then it was fine because there was no bones. This dude, he looks to me like he's got bones in there.
Yeah. It looks
And some
like
of them.
Yeah.
Yep.
You just wake up and all of a sudden you just grab.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These 2 don't look like they're completely separated. And he's got an extra thumb. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
that must
7.
be really insulting to dogs because they don't have thumbs and this guy has 2.
Yes, 2 for real.
Still thumbs to a dog.
So this is not uncommon at all. And very often when it happens, it's kind of like you know, my cousin's kid, like I was saying, where there's no bone in there, but still, it's really interesting to think it's not that uncommon. Okay, so achondroplasia. Achondroplasia is sort of the umbrella that covers many types of dwarfism. So most of these facts here are going to be like the most common form that we're going to talk about. So large head, large forehead, flattened bridge of nose, crowded or crooked teeth, short arms, legs, fingers, but normal sized torso. So this is a particular type of dwarfism being addressed right there. Upper arms and thighs are more shortened, bowed lower legs, curved lower spine, lordosis or sway back, which can lead to a hunchback, kyphosis on top because you're overcompensating. Small hump near the shoulders that usually goes away when the child begins walking, flat feet that are short and broad, extra space between the ring finger and middle fingers, which is called a trident hand, poor muscle tone and loose joints, short spells of slow or stopped breathing, which is called apnea, middle ear infections that occur often, which can lead to hearing loss, delayed development milestones such as walking, occurring at 18 to 24 months instead of 12 months, small canals in the spinal bones that can cause breathing problems. So there's two main categories. There's proportionate and disproportionate. So when they're talking here about short arms, legs, and fingers, but normal sized torso, that would be disproportionate. Proportionate would be when your body parts are all in proportion, but they're very small, right? And then there are in total 14 types of achondroplasia. So there's a lot of different types of dwarfism. So the epidemiology for it, all ethnic backgrounds, and its frequency worldwide is about 1 in 25,000. Does anybody know anybody with achondroplasia? I do. Yep. I do know a lot of people. I've been around, man. Scary. So human chromosomes. So chromosomes 21 and 22 are the smallest human autosomes. They're itty bitty, right? But despite that, chromosome 22 contains 43 million pairs of DNA. 43 million base pairs on that itty bitty chromosome, and chromosome 21 contains 32 million. So they might be small, but there's still a lot of genetic material. Sex-linked genes. Okay, this is where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like we were talking about today with hemophilia, right? So if you've got an X chromosome and it has all these genes on it, and you get this one from your mom and you get another one from your dad, chances are if there's a recessive gene on one, there's going to be something to cover it on the other. But if you get a Y from your dad, there's nothing to cover because it doesn't even have those genes. There's nothing there. And one of my college professors, now granted, all of the professors in the biology department were female, but one of my college professors joked that the Y chromosome is just weaker in general. And it is, technically speaking, it is weaker in general. Sorry, guys. So many sex-linked genes are found on X chromosomes. More than 100 sex-linked genetic disorders are found on the X, in fact. And males have just one X, so all the X-linked alleles are expressed in males, even if they're recessive. So we're talking about things like color blindness, right down there at the bottom. That's probably our most common one. Hemophilia, which we did in lab today. Muscular dystrophy. Fragile X. Okay, Fragile X is a disorder where your X chromosome is somewhat incomplete. And I'll tell you more about that when we get to that slide. That's an interesting one. So color blindness. Okay, here it comes. If you don't see the numbers, you might be colorblind. So it's the most common disorder is green-red color blindness. It affects 1 in 12 males.
I can see them all.
8%, and it affects 1 in 200 females, less than 1%. My dad's colorblind. He has the green-red colorblind issue.
I can see
I
everything.
can't see
My
the top
friend is
right.
the.
You can't see this one?
Maybe you're in a bad age.
Top right.
Oh, top right.
I can't see that one.
Can't see that one?
No.
Huh. But you can see this one? Maybe there's a glare.
The 23 in the top right is really hard to see, but I can see it.
Hard
Yeah.
for me was
Yeah,
9.
there's
but-
nothing over there.
Mhm.
I can't see it.
Wait, there's a 23 in the top right. I thought the 23 was on the left.
Oh, top left.
Yeah,
sorry.
Top left.
At the top left.
So
Hard to see.
23, 36, 9, 4, 48, 15.
Yeah, I don't
Cool.
see any now.
I did have somebody in the first class who went, there are numbers in there? And I'm like, yeah, there's numbers in there. And he's like, I don't see them. I said, oh, you might want to go home and look some of this up. You might be colorblind, friend. Yep.
I can tell that there's something.
So some women have a really rare super color vision called tetrachromacy. Now this is linked to the X. Now it's only in women,
A lot.
or almost only in women,
I can see a lot.
and they can see up to 100 million shades of color. And the reason for this is because you have two main types of detection cells in your retina. You have rods and cones. Rods detect light, cones detect color. We have typically 3 types of cones. Tetrachromats, as they're called, have 4. So they can see colors that the rest of us cannot see, which is pretty darn cool.
How many bars are there?
You can, I don't know the number, but
Oh.
I was gonna say, you can go online and look up these as well as color blindness tests, but if you look up tetrachromacy test or tetrachromatic test or tetrachromat test, you'll see them. And a lot of times it'll be like 2 boxes side by side and it'll say which one is lighter,
Oh, I've
and
done
they're
this.
fairly different.
I've done this. I have,
Yeah,
yes. Oh, I have.
you have good vision, and it's really, really hard. Some of them are really challenging, but
I see 35.
you see, that's what Lily counted, 35, I think, before.
I did.
So-
I know there's less than 100.
The question is, like right here, is this one color?
That's one color to me.
Now that's 2
Oh.
colors.
I see
That's
2.
one color.
Yeah, I can see 2 there, and I can see 2 here.
Oh, yeah, that's 2 colors. That's 1 color.
Yep, it's interesting, right? And it's in different hues. You can see more than in others, right? So another example would be hemophilia, which we went about in lab. So that's a dominant. All right, so 2 important genes, it's a sex link. So 2 important genes carried on the X chromosome help blood to clot, right? So in hemophilia, a protein necessary for normal clotting is just missing. And it's about 1 in 10,000 males with hemophilia. But here's this family. What were you gonna say, Shannon?
Sorry, I was looking at it, I said, I think I'm allergic to pink.
Oh, there's that. Yeah, could be.
Good word.
Don't like this. So yeah, so if it's supposed to be 1 in 10,000 here and the lab said 1 in 5,000, so let's say 1 in 7,500, like I said, yeah, that's a lot for one family. And again, it's not just because one family happened to have it. If your family had hemophilia and you acted like most people and you reproduced with just people randomly, this wouldn't be an issue. The issue is because they were reproducing only with other royal families and they're all related. I mean, and if you look it up, this is not the only problem in European royal families. There are a whole bunch of weird things. Like King Richard had every health problem imaginable. I mean, dude had a hunchback and all kinds of stuff. And I mean, like people were terrified of him because he was like, I don't know. So, I mean, it's not nice. He probably had all kinds of issues. Yeah. The Habsburg. Yep. The jawline. Correct.
When you're talking in lab about the king leaving to go like marry an American woman, I'm like,
Oh,
I've
yeah.
heard that before.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
the same.
Yep.
King George.
Edward this-
Buckled legs.
He what?
Buckled legs, I think. Was King-
Oh, yeah, I think he did. And yeah, a lot of them have had major
Isn't that
issues.
funny? In an
Yep.
attempt to keep themselves, I guess in their eyes, more pure, they make themselves a lot weaker.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So
No one would mess with
it's a mess. It's a big mess.
All right, there too.
But nobody liked King Richard anyway because they believed he murdered his nephews. Have you heard that whole story? That's a good one. That's a really good one.
I also
Locked him in the Tower of London. Yeah.
I also read a story that Babe Ruth died and murdered his first wife in a house fire. That was a rabbit.
Wow. I have to look that up.
What?
Not heard of.
That's fascinating.
After 4 hours of like discussing and
Yeah.
hearing it, but
So sex-linked genes, more sex-linked stuff. So here is muscular dystrophy, which is predominantly going to be in males. So yeah, Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So it's a disorder that results in progressive weakening of skeletal muscle. So this is one that as you age, it gets worse. And it generally is mostly impactful for children because a lot of them don't get past this point. So it's 1 out of every 3,000 in the US males born with this. And there are a lot of,
Is it only now?
it's on the X. So there are a lot of, fundraisers for this. I think this is the one that Jerry's Kids used to be. Anyway, muscular dystrophy is pretty well known because it's been pretty highly publicized and it's not that uncommon. 1 out of 3,000 is not that uncommon. So Fragile X. So this is interesting. Fragile X causes intellectual disability, behavioral and learning challenges, and specific physical characteristics, which include that long face, the prominent jaw, large ears, unusually flexible fingers, flat feet, and enlarged testicles, which sounds pretty terrible. And this is what it looks like. The X chromosome is actually like, it's not damaged because nothing happened to it. That's just the way it is. Like, it's not complete. It's kind of, it's fragile. It's a great word for it. So I used to work with a lady. She was a good friend of mine when I was teaching at the last school where I worked, and she was a carrier for Fragile X. She had affected uncles, and she and her sister had been tested as children. She had an unaffected brother, but she and her sister had been tested to find out whether they were carriers, and they were. So she did not want to conceive biological children because the chances of her having an affected child were 1 in 4. And that was really scary to her because this is not something fun to live with, you know. So not for anybody, not for the affected person, not for anybody. So she actually and her husband went through the whole egg donation process so that they could take her genetic material completely out of it. And that ended up not working for them. And then they ended up adopting 2 kids. But she has, in her entire life, been very, very careful because she doesn't want to conceive biological children because she knows she could pass on something really miserable to somebody. So sex-linked genes. So here's the thing with sex-linked genes. There's chromosome inactivation. If you got an X chromosome here, all right, and you've got 2 alleles on it right here, ding, ding, they're not always turned on. One's going to be what you call switched off. Sometimes it's always switched off. Sometimes it switches off and on and off and on. And that's how you get these beautiful tortoiseshell cats. So if you ever seen a tortoiseshell cat, it's almost always female. And the reason it's female, you can assume it's female. And the reason it's female is because it has an orange allele and a black allele. And as the embryo is developing, they're switching on and off and taking turns of who's in charge. So as this cat is forming its pigmented areas in its skin for its fur, it may have an orange one at this point and a black one and an orange one and a black one. And that's how you get this gorgeous pattern. Interestingly, this is also apparent in baldness in humans. So baldness is carried on the X chromosome, but it very rarely affects women, right? It affects men, and men, when they go bald, they go bald. But women have what's called pattern baldness. And the reason it's called pattern baldness is this exact same thing. Bald, not bald, bald, not bald, bald, not bald, and they lose in patches as opposed to losing like your whole head of hair. So gentlemen, if you're curious as to whether or not you may be bald one day, take a look at your maternal grandfather. Sorry, Cole. And they will tell you whether or not you may be bald one day.
Let's go. All my family members on every side has never been bald. So
Yeah.
I'm
My-
so
my
scared.
grandma- my
I'm
grandma-
scared.
It's cool. I like it.
A lot of kids have a.
As long as I stay.
So these chromosomes in cells are going to be switched on and off randomly. All right, so let's move on. So now we're going to look not at gene disorders, but at chromosome disorders. So this is a little different. So the most common error in meiosis occurs when homologous chromosomes fail to separate. It's called non-disjunction. So then what you get is an abnormal number of chromosomes, and those find their way into the gametes, and then this disorder of chromosomes can develop. So if 2 copies of an autosomal chromosome fail to separate during meiosis, an individual may be born with 3 copies of a chromosome, and that's called trisomy. So here's a karyotype. What do you see?
Small.
Extra chromosome number 21.
And what happened to 22?
It's a chromosome.
You like.
It's just the picture. I
And
don't
is
know.
that a fragile X as well?
No. So trisomy 21, I guarantee you all know it. You know it as Down syndrome. That is trisomy 21. Okay. If you have an extra 21st chromosome, you have Down syndrome. Now, I've seen cute t-shirts that even say things like, what's to worry about? It's just an extra chromosome. My friend's daughter has Downs and she has this t-shirt. It's adorable. She's little, so she wears this t-shirt around. What's the big deal? It's just an extra chromosome. So now you guys know what Downs is characterized by, but some of these things you may not know. So obviously learning disability is the most obvious one that you probably realize. Delayed development, short in stature, speech delays, lazy eyes or spots, difficulty thinking and understanding. Okay. Bent little finger. Next time you're around a Down's friend, you may notice they have a bent little finger. Congenital heart disease can be really common. Displacement of the tongue. If you notice, sometimes when they talk, their tongues are really obvious. That has to do with sort of how it's structurally attached. Excess skin on the back of the neck, flaccid muscles, hearing loss, immune deficiency, low set ears, obesity, obstructive sleep apnea. That's not fun. That's when you don't breathe well at night because something is squashing down in your throat. Seborrheic dermatitis, and a single line on the palm. Thickening of skin on the palms and soles, and thyroid. Yeah, look at your palm.
7.
Somebody with Downs literally has one line that goes like this. They don't have the crisscross lines. And thyroid disease and vision disorders.
My niece has.
Your niece has Downs?
So now I gotta go.
Yep. You have to say, show me your hands, and you'll see one line, little finger. So disorders also occur among the sex chromosomes. So this is when we get into, you're gonna see a diagram, and it has genitalia on it. Oh my God, don't worry, we haven't even gotten to those lessons yet. They're coming.
No.
So disorders that occur among sex chromosomes. So Turner and Klinefelter are the best known. All right. And Turner is when there's only one X. So the female tends to be sterile, and the sex organs don't develop at puberty as they should. Klinefelter is an extra X, or 2 X's, or 3 X's, or 4 X's, and a Y.
That's a lot.
So if you have Klinefelter, you're going to mostly present as male externally, but you can have some breast development, not necessarily. They tend to be tall, and the physique is a little more feminized than, they're saying feminized, like curvier than I guess your average man. But this is because they have extra X's, but they still have a Y. And because they still have a Y, they get male genitalia. And then Turner syndrome, you only have the one X. And in this case, their genitalia doesn't develop fully. And they tend to have issues like with their heart here, contraction of the aorta. That's not fun. And all sorts of other very specific things like pigmented spots on their skin and like a lower posterior hairline. Their hair comes down lower in the back, their hairline. Very odd thing to be conjoined, but it is. So this is not that uncommon. This one right here, there may be people walking around with this that don't even know they have it because they're really not that affected by it in their day-to-day life, and they don't realize that they have it. If you had Turner, you would know you had Turner. And a lot of people with Klinefelters obviously know they have Klinefelters. So there have been no reported cases of babies being born without an X, indicating that the X chromosome contains genes that are vital for survival and development. So if for some reason you had 2 gametes that were missing sex chromosomes, the zygote would not survive development. So molecular genetics, Human Genome Project. We've talked about it a little bit. 1990 until now, still going. They've managed to find all these genes. This is a really interesting graphic. I like this one, but it shows all the stuff that we have found so far. And we found a lot. There's a lot. Molecular genetics. This is DNA fingerprinting. This is what we did, right? We did electrophoresis. It sort of worked. So this is right. So the fingerprinting is using molecular biology to identify individuals, which we did in lab, what, week before last? So in gene therapy, this is a newer thing. So an absent or faulty gene is replaced by a normal working gene. This is when we get really technical here. Yeah. They edit your gene cells, they inject stuff. Now, your bone marrow are a type of multipotent cell. So that's why bone marrow is often used with stuff like this, because it can differentiate, but usually what it's differentiating into is blood cells. Like your blood cells are produced in your bone marrow. This gets super involved, and I don't even know how they do it. I don't even have a clue. It gets really, really involved. Yeah, really, really involved. So here's a video on CRISPR.
Oh, CRISPR.
Ooh, that's a bit loud.
Every cell in our body contains a copy of our genome, over 20,000 billion letters of DNA.
What about something?
DNA consists of two strands twisted into a double helix and held together by a simple pairing rule. A pairs with T and G pairs with C. Our genes shape who we are as individuals and as a species. Genes also have profound effects on health, and thanks to advances in DNA sequencing, researchers have identified thousands of genes that affect our risk of disease. To understand how genes work, researchers need ways to control them. Changing genes in living cells is not easy, but recently a new method has been developed that promises to dramatically improve our ability to edit the DNA of any species, including humans. The CRISPR method is based on a natural system used by bacteria to protect themselves from infection by viruses. When the bacterium detects the presence of virus DNA, it produces two types of short RNA, one of which contains a sequence that matches that of the invading virus. These two RNAs form a complex with a protein called Cas9. Cas9 is a nuclease, a type of enzyme that can cut DNA. When the matching sequence, known as a guide RNA, finds its target within the viral genome, the Cas9 cuts the target DNA, disabling the virus. Over the past few years, researchers studying this system realized that it could engineer to cut not just viral DNA, but any DNA sequence at a precisely chipped location by changing the guide RNA to match the target. This can be done not just in a test tube, but also within the nucleus of a living cell. Once inside the nucleus, the resulting complex will lock onto a short sequence known as the PAN. The Cas9 will unzip the DNA and match it to its target RNA. If the match is complete, the Cas9 will use two tiny molecular scissors to cut the DNA. When this happens, the cell tries to repair the cut, but the repair process is error-prone, leading to mutations that can disable the gene, allowing researchers to understand its function. These mutations are random, but sometimes researchers need to be more precise. For example, by replacing a mutant gene with a healthy copy. This can be done by adding another piece of DNA that carries the desired sequence. Once the CRISPR system has made a cut, this DNA template can pair up with cut ends, recombining and replacing the original sequence with the new version. All this can be done in cultured cells, including stem cells that can give rise to many different cell types. It can also be done in a fertilized egg, allowing the creation of transgenic animals with mutations. And unlike previous methods, CRISPR can be used to target many genes at once, a big advantage for studying complex human diseases that are caused not by a single mutation, but by many genes acting together. These methods are being improved rapidly and will have many applications in basic research, in drug development, in agriculture, and perhaps eventually for treating human patients with genetic disease.
That's a bit scary. So it would be great to cure genetic disorders, but if human cells can be manipulated to cure diseases, should biologists try to engineer people taller or change their eye color? How far do we go with this? Yeah.
So, two things. One, the little bacteria thing reminds me of a spider, a spaceship, and the thing from Tremors, the worms.
The bacteriophage, yes, okay.
Yeah. And also, like, I was just watching a show last night that had like, it was obviously fake because it's a Hollywood thing, but they were like taking like athletes' clothes and like messing with like the genes and leftover DNA and stuff and like trying to engineer that stuff. And it's really like weird because you're like, eventually people are going to have this power because like the world doesn't stop.
We're getting closer and closer to this. Yes, absolutely.
Cars are probably within the next 100 years. Right.
So you have to ask, what would you engineer out? And this is where, you know, bioethics comes into place. So say, okay, if you could engineer out something like Huntington's. Most people with Huntington's probably, and certainly most people would be like, yeah, we should engineer that out. That's really terrible. But what about disorders that have like a cultural impact, like Downs or achondroplasia? Would you want a world with no people with Downs or no people with dwarfism? Would that be good or bad? And what about hearing loss? So hearing impaired people, deaf people, that's a whole culture. If you could get rid of deafness, so no human was ever deaf, would you want to? Like,
I mean, I feel like if we were to do that, it would have to be like a choice from said person.
well, right. But the point would be like that person, the point is those people aren't created yet. This would be fixing it before the people are created. To be engineering parental DNA so
I
that,
don't want that.
yeah,
picture," or yes, I want this person to be.
right, absolutely. And there are definitely, you
What's
know,
more a precedent of like baby catalogs where you go to your doctor and say what you want your child to be.
yeah, I want this, and that.
Yes, I would like the eyes model.
And we already do that to a degree, but most of it is subconscious. We do choose our mates based on certain things. Most people that, you know, are psychologically healthy are not going after the most women, let's do it this way. Most women who are psychologically healthy are not going after the guy who has no job, is, you know, really super unattractive, face has no symmetry. That's the biggest thing. When it comes to attractiveness, it's symmetry that matters more than anything. They've done a ton of studies on it. Symmetry, go figure. You know, his face is completely one big eye and one little eye and ears over here. Nobody's going after that guy because somewhere in your DNA, it's built into for you ladies to go, oh no, I'm not reproducing with that. And men are looking for things too, that it's also subconscious. I mean, there's a reason for shape to be the way the shape is. Everything like that is very specific. And some of it we don't think about, we don't consider, but we do select. And in most species, it's the females that are choosy. The males are just trying to get their DNA out there because that's their job in life. But it's the females that are choosy. And the reason it's the females are choosy is because they have the biggest investment. For most males, the passing on of DNA to an offspring is a pretty quick event and they're done. But for females, it's a 9-month investment that risks health. You have to put all that, you know, it's energy, it's all of that, right? And then the raising of the offspring. So that's why, you know, peacocks look super fancy. And peahens are like, yeah, you, not you. You know, that's why. That's absolutely why. It has to do with investment and risk.
Unless you're like a turtle again, because lay your eggs, you stay by.
Dude, I happened to catch turtles mating, 2 box turtles in the woods. And I'm the weird, slightly perverted person who videoed it because I'd never seen anything like it in my life. But he was biting her head. He was leaning over, stretching his neck out like this far. I didn't know it would come out that far, biting at her head, trying to get her to come out of her shell because she was still tucked in. So all of her was tucked in and he was on top of her. And he was like, come out. And she was like, no, I don't know if she was going to object forever. Like sometimes that's part of the courtship is the initial objection. And I don't know how it works with them.
It's funny that a box turtle got rejected.
They did. Well, my senior research project dealt with specific mating behaviors with mice. And it was funny because there are specific behaviors and sometimes it'll go on and on and on for a long time before she will allow him to mate with her. But the female mice will do a thing where they literally stand up and punch him right in the pop. I mean, it's funny. Stand up on their hind legs and just pop him and he'll keep coming because that's what they do. They are so persistent, so persistent. Ugh.
Yeah, like that one.
Where did that go? I clicked the wrong button.
Something that you want to go back to.
Right? Yeah.
The female life is just like.
I mean, this is true.
One more.
Yep. So a complete set of genetic.
In the natural world around us, our
What
powerful biological
is even
tools whose
playing?
Potential scientists are just
I have
beginning
no
to
idea
unlock.
what's playing. That is bizarre.
For
Oh,
hundreds of years,
it's
bacteria
CRISPR
have been
again.
under
I
attack
clicked it.
in life.
Stop. Go away. CRISPR again.
What's the actual name?
It's an abbreviation for, I will tell you because it's hard to remember. CRISPR. Where is it? Krispy Kreme.
That's like a knockoff to Krispy Kreme. It's
Oh, come on, and not gonna tell me what it stands for. I know it has, I know the cast thing is part of it.
The engineer just.
Somebody needs to click that.
Mm-hmm.
No, not genetically engineered donuts. Donuts with the
Genetics.
technology in them.
I'm not going to a
Yeah,
trucking
nanobots
school.
in your system, just like messing with your DNA.
You eat a
Yeah,
donut.
give
Your
it
eyes
to
turn
the
green.
donut. Here.
I mean, I did it. I mean,
How did I do that
if the
wrong?
doctor was like, here, we'll pay you $50 to eat
Creeper
this
stand.
donut.
I
I'd be
know.
like, "Bang."
I'm trying to find it because I can't remember all of a sudden. Clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeats. There you go.
What?
CRISPR.
Good to know.
Clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic
Say
repeats.
that every time, or would you
Would you
rather
like
just say
would you
CRISPR?
like the cluster? Okay.
That's a good one. So let's do,
From where?
oh wait, I was gonna do the,
Colonial anarchy.
whoop.
Chickerman. No, yes.
Color vision.
Yeah, I love these quizzes.
Wow.
How about this one?
Wow, quiz.
Wow. Can you read all the words?
Jackson.
I'll look with you guys. I'll look.
Alright, I got it.
I'll screen wrong thing.
It's on that SNL playlist right here, right after that.
Ah. Oh wait, I can see it on here. List.
Oh, you can see it on there.
Hang on, this is a little brighter. I don't know how to turn off the TV screen now.
Okay,
Yeah, I
yeah.
got nothing. There's nothing.
Oh,
I see nothing.
something's there and it's vertical.
I got
Oh,
it.
no, I see it.
I see
Barely. It's a
nothing.
meme, I think, right? Is that meme? Yeah. okay.
Meme.
Or if you're my grandma, maybe. Maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah,
May?
squint, I can see it better.
Oh, lost.
Lost.
We're all like, oh, no.
Oh,
That's the only one I can even
I couldn't see the last two.
Yay, I got one.
Thank you.
Elevator jazz is terrible.
Oh. Or.
Fame.
Fame.
I turn off entirely.
Oh, once you see it, you can like really see it.
Yeah.
10 questions. We've gotten two.
No, 50 out of the two people that we've done.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Is the next
I
one.
see nothing.
You don't see wow?
It's the first patch.
Jamie figured
wow.
out next one's gonna be quiz.
Quiz?
Yeah, because it's a wow quiz. That's
Yeah.
Oh, that makes
I'll
sense.
bet you a subway there.
I wonder if there's a, what?
I'll take this.
What's a bird?
Wait, no, it's not.
Oh,
What?
oh,
Bird flashing.
wait a minute.
hey, on TV.
Wait a minute, wait a minute.
Why is
Ah.
there a
I
bird?
was gonna say, is there a way to turn up the screen brightness? There's got to be a way to do it. I just don't know how.
Parental lock.
Picture
Yeah, Prickle Lock.
or
Picture.
Game.
oh, that's probably picture game.
Aspect ratio. Advanced.
Funky when you press the bird, it goes.
I know he sweats. If you roll him really hard, he's like, oh. Let me see. Picture mode.
Everyone watching on video,
Aspect.
like, what are you doing?
What is it?
Picture test.
Maybe the picture mode settings. or something.
Maybe it says game setting.
Oh, that has.
Contrast. Oh, here we go.
Brightness.
Brightness. Let's pop the brightness up a little bit.
2000.
Let's not go to there. That'll be stupid, I think.
All of a sudden.
All right, how about there?
Yeah, just like.
Let's go 75. That seems fair.
We look away.
Okay, let me go back over here. Full screen back up.
Gotta go back to whichever one's after wow.
Whichever one's after wow. Okay.
Unless they got the quiz.
There wasn't this.
Wait,
You
don't
missed
feel
it.
bad.
It went off.
Oh, you missed all.
Hang on. We'll go back.
Nope.
And I move this so I can get to the thing at the bottom.
But
I think it's awkward.
I think it's 8.
It was
Wow. It's
Yeah.
wow.
Wow.
Same.
Racial fame. Okay.
Okay.
That's right after this one, I think, so.
Yeah.
Wow.
Same we all saw, right? Yeah. It's a little brighter, isn't it?
It's a little bit brighter. It's a little bit brighter.
Wow.
You guys are so nice.
It wasn't quiz, I know that. That's one.
Everyone watching the
Move.
Move.
I'm so good at
I
this.
can't, I can barely see.
Okay, I
it.
can see something. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Go.
It says
No,
move.
it's move. No, no.
I can barely.
Hey guys, it was move.
Yeah.
Barely.
Alright.
Bro, I have superior vision. I'm so good at seeing.
You're
Oh, I
sitting.
think that's it.
Might be the glare.
Oh, it says.
I think it's
L.
L.
I think it says
Ilk.
There's an L
L.
there. Yeah.
I see L.
Thank you.
L. It's ill. I think it's ill. Oh,
Hey.
it's no.
I wouldn't have gotten that right.
It says I can barely get the shape. But I can.
Oh.
dear, I can't
Oh.
see.
Okay.
Nope.
Yeah.
An
Ear.
A.
Nope.
I see an A.
They're all amazing.
I know.
Fat.
Dick.
I couldn't even see
Bro, I
anything.
couldn't see nothing.
Okay, so none of us are. Of course, the fourth person to right is
Number 9.
okay.
Bog.
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 You're most available.
I'm gonna try to tell if I want to stand up or not, but I'm gonna this way. Oh.
Bog, I see.
Get this way.
I have pillow. I have adaptation.
Careful, careful, hey guys. Guys.
Oh.
Oh, no, I
Ale.
E. A. A.
Yeah. Oh,
Hey. P.
I know. A-R. It's R.
Oh.
I'm so bro.
Yeah.
Like, I have so bad
Got you
eyes.
right up here.
Bro, literally my eyes.
You have amazing color vision.
No.
Okay, I think I can see a little more.
I only get 3 out of all of them.
Guys, Scott.
I had to like move around.
I know it's not.
Y'all, stop.
I was like, I'm back and
Whoop,
forth.
I didn't mean to click that one. No, I was gonna do a different one.
That's what you said.
It's still on the other screen.
Oh.
Just to close this one.
Yeah, it's on my heavy metal playlist right after.
Heavy
metal?
Mm.
Yeah, right after Thunderstorm.
Oh, okay.
Welcome to the Jungle. Immigrant Song. Really.
Okay. You wanna show me one here? Oh, here's that thing.
Oh, gosh.
Here it is again.
Everyone's
So it
favorite.
says, if you see less than 20 colors, you're like 25% of the population in a dichromat. Dichromats only have 2 types of color receptors. If you see between 20 and 32, you have 3 types of color receptors, which is 50% of the population. If you see between 33 and 39, you're a tetrachromat and have 4 types of chromes. Cones. All right, so click it to make it larger. Make it larger. That does not make it larger. That's a lie. Oh, stop it. There we go.
I don't.
Okay, 1, 2. Oh, those
I'm
are
gonna make it a little bigger. There we go. There we go.
I see
Okay.
35,
Wait, we can see numbers in this?
No.
so. Numbers, no.
6, 7,
I still see 35.
11.
Dude, I see just colors. Straight up, I don't know what y'all
I
are
think
talking
I
about.
can
I
see
think y'all are lying
36
to
if I
me.
counted correctly.
You see one extra color than me that you're telling me?
This
I
is-
see like
no.
27.
No, this just
Wow.
colors, right?
Yeah.
It's just colors.
Yeah, this is just, wait, I can see
Yeah,
4
no,
colors.
this-
Oh, I can do
shades
that. Oh,
come.
I'm so good at this.
I see 37.
I see.
I see like 50.
Oh my goodness, dude, really? Yeah. I usually do pretty well on these though, so I've wondered.
Cause like, there's so
I see
many.
84. I got
I got to halfway and there was
I
25.
can differentiate yellow and green a little bit more.
You can differentiate the yellow and green more? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
The green.
Said
touch of chromax respond to yellow
colors. That thing is the one.
That's interesting. Yellow.
That's why they said that.
You're like, that's a
screens
special
can't
type of
consider
thing.
it accurately because of index to
I don't know.
Yeah.
Wait, how many colors were there?
Yeah.
39?
Yellow bag.
39, I think. So
Bagels.
I see,
More than 39.
all right, so look.
I think it's more.
y'all. So there's this one here. That's one band, right?
No, I see.
And that's a second.
No.
No, there's two.
And that's a third. There's
No,
two
you
here.
Yeah.
Just went across 4 bands.
I see one. This looks like a streak, but not a whole color to me.
James is. Oh,
That
there's 4 bands.
Looks
James,
like
all
One,
the way up,
out
it's
of here.
two bands.
Two. I see it, but it looks like it's separated by a. That looks like a
shading.
fudged thing for me.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a. Hang on, let me see if there's a better.
Yeah.
Oh,
Let's see if there's an image of it. That's better.
I must be like extra blind or something. 'Cause I saw 52 colors.
And that looks the same kind of screwy.
I saw
Wait,
52
what's that? What's
colors.
the circle one? Hold
Like,
on. Look, that's the
my
circle.
eyes
This
were
one?
like,
Go down.
Oh, how about this one?
Yeah, that's, I can't see anything.
There's
Up
nothing
there?
there. Those are
Okay,
just-
good.
Yeah, those are
That is
just-
And I don't know what we're looking for.
Oh, look,
That,
it's
that
there.
is white.
All right, so
James, what do you see?
No.
I see colors.
Okay. I see.
You got him.
so like Sydney was just saying, computer screens only use red, green pixels. They can't display all the hues. What am I supposed to see here? I just see.
I can't see anything. So
I don't know if I'm supposed to see
I don't think
something.
there's supposed to be any.
So would you have to print it out in order for it to?
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, how about these?
Oh, boy. oh,
Here we
boy.
go.
Oh,
Let's see if it'll pull up nicely so you can see it. No, it's gonna be some dumb blog. thing. Shh, guys, chill. For real, chill. Vector stuff. Oh, here, I've seen this one before. All right, so here's a color test. All right. If it'll pull up. Open, open, open. All right, this is a famous one here. Mhm.
56.
You see them all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't see top middle.
That.
Can't see top, middle is
Hard,
6.
I think I see a 6.
It's 6.
Yeah, I see that.
12.
Yep. All right, if you've got about 5 more minutes, guys, here's your, I'm gonna put your 2 slides for homework responses up here if you want to check your notes. And then you'll be good. So I'm gonna leave this one up for a minute and then I'll swap over to the other one if you guys want to check your notes for your answers.
Oh, thank you.
Guys, leave the pillows alone. That's number 3. I shouldn't have to say anything more than 1 time. Yeah, we're gonna break something and then I gotta deal with that. For real. I don't care about breaking the pillow. I've had my lamps shattered a couple times. These people are crazy in here. All right, and there's the next one. For real.
Darcy thinks she's gonna throw heads.
All right, she's not.
You need a pencil.
That, Darcy's thinking you need a pencil.
No.
And so it's blank. No.
Why?
Darcy?
Yeah.
Why?
Oh, yes. My-
Oh no, she's talking like you talk sometimes with like the Venom voice. And
You know, Alex and I would have
Efron,
told
so I
her.
stopped her from drawing a Zac Efron. And then she stopped.
Little do you know, Alex and I have.
All right, so you guys are good. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Be sure
Let's
you
go
complete
Braves.
your
Braves.
events. Yeah, let's go Braves.
Not east.
Maybe, maybe not.
Probably not.
We weren't able to look at my
Not
emails yet, right?
I saw it, but I didn't open them yet. Yeah, I do it all at one time after class.
So I needed to talk to you about one of them.
Okay, what is it? Let me go to it.
When she was talking about like switching things on and off, I'm like, that reminds me that Perry or that episode where Dr. Doof is on like a face I've heard, and they're like having an evil like contest, I suppose, and they're all like knocking each other out of the way. Anyway,
I didn't watch these for a few episodes, so.
Let me turn off the, let me take it off here though.
Oh, yeah, so probably.
Oop, oop, oop. Where's my thing? It's usually right at the top. It says disconnect. I'll just turn it off.
So.
Bye. Go away. Go away. Okay. It's gonna be like that. Get right in front of it. Thank you.
Did we lose again?
All right. What's,
Last night again?
what's up, Chicken Little?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's my, yeah, that's my homework on that. But there was one I sent you about, have you